This Is Monsters is a true crime podcast and YouTube channel where I tell the stories of the worst people on the planet. Though the stories of the victims are told, we focus on the monster who carried out the evil act. The show is split into seasons, and each season has a theme. In Season 1, we covered cases of filicide, which is the act of a parent killing their own child. In Season 2, we covered cases of people killing for love. We recently finished up Season 3, where we covered cases of parricide, which is the act of someone killing their parents. Tune in now as we start Season 4, where we dive into the minds of family annihilators, sick individuals who decided to destroy their entire families. Check us out anywhere that you listen to podcasts or on YouTube by searching This Is Monsters.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, we continue our investigation into the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my nonpareil co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. Okay,
Hello, Alice.
This time I actually have no idea what that means.
I'm pretty sure it means without equal or without parallel, like, amazing in a way that can barely be described.
You know what? I just looked it up, and I thought they were candies.
They are candies. There is a candy that's named.
I thought you were calling
similarly.
me a candy.
No, I think they named the candy because of the word, is the way it went. So.
As
Ain't
that
nothing
would
wrong
make
with
sense.
being candy. I love candy.
I wasn't about to,
candy.
show how, I guess, novice I was by saying I'm sweet. But
Well, you are sweet.
That was a really good word. I learned a new word
Point of
today.
fact. Good. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. I'm sure someone will let us know, as they always do when we mispronounce things, which is fairly common on the show, but that's okay. We're not, we're not above it. We do
definitely
what we
are not
do
above
what we
it.
can.
Let's be honest. That's a joke, Brett.
Definitely not. Okay, well, we are back today with JonBenét Ramsey. Last week's JonBenét Ramsey case was somewhat interesting, I hope. It took us a little while to get into the case, but I hope everyone appreciated why we felt the need to spend some time going over those basic facts about the case so that we had this, this foundation on which to build of how we're going to look at this case and the kind of facts we're looking at. So I hope you appreciated that. But today we're really going to start diving in to the case. We're going to continue with the timeline where we left you. In case you've forgotten, we gave you an overview of this case and the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, and then we discussed the beginnings of the timeline, specifically the days leading up to the death of JonBenét Ramsey, days that may or may not be critical to understanding what happened in this case. But today we're getting into the day of the murder itself, which takes us, unfortunately, to Christmas Day, December 25th, 1996.
By the way, I just have to say, acandyrose.com is like such an intense website.
I know. It's like you go to it,
it's like a disco ball.
Yeah, if you go to it, look out if you've got seizures or epilepsy or anything.
I was gonna say, look out for definitely getting some viruses.
But it's like the perfect 90s website.
It's really good. It's actually a fantastic website, but when I went to go read things, I was like, I can't focus. There's so many flashing lights. So Christmas morning, the Ramseys wake up about 6 a.m. I have to say, that's about when my family wakes up as well with young children. So this seems like a pretty normal day so far, especially because there's the excitement of Christmas Day. Around noon that day, John is preparing for the trip that they plan to take the next day. They plan to take their own private plane to go visit family. And to prepare for this, he calls his pilot, checks on the plane, making sure everything is ready to go for the trip.
And I think this is sort of a good example of how much wealth we're dealing with here. You know, John's not the richest man in America by any stretch, but when you have your own pilot and your own plane, that's pretty good.
I don't have either of those, so there's that much. Now, the rest of that day, there's not much information, but probably like a lot of us, it's a typical Christmas day. And it's not until about 5 or 6 p.m. that the Ramseys leave for a Christmas party at Fleet and Priscilla White's house. The rest of the evening, time-wise, gets a bit murky, but we're going to do the best that we can. So the Ramseys go to the White Christmas party, and at some point later that evening, they leave the party, but they don't go straight home. Rather, they take a couple of detours. They stop to drop off gifts at their friends' houses, specifically at Stuart and Roxy Walker's house and at Glenn and Susan Stein's house. And then they get home at some time after making those 2 stops. John puts JonBenét to bed when they get home. You want to talk about the controversy of whether she's asleep or not?
Sure. And even that, you know, it's funny how much controversy there is in this case and how many small details are disputed. And this is one of the first ones. Was JonBenét awake or asleep when they arrived at home? We're going to talk more about that as we dive into all the different aspects of this case. But just know there are people who argue, and there is testimony to the effect. And John even says some things that make you think that JonBenét was awake when they arrived home. John has maintained, at least since the immediate aftermath of the murder, that she was asleep in the car and he picked her up and he carried her to bed and put her into bed. And that was essentially the last time that he saw her alive.
Then at some point, Burke and John play with one of his toys, and then Burke goes to bed sometime after JonBenét. Around 10 p.m. that night, that is the last time JonBenét is seen alive. And that's when her mom, Patsy, checks in on her. There's not a specific time there, but she thinks it's about 10. And very soon after that, Patsy goes to bed. It's estimated that she goes to bed between 10 and 10:30. John follows close behind. He is estimated to go to bed basically about 3 minutes after her, sometime between 10:03 and 10:33 p.m.
And, you know, those are kind of early times, 10 o'clock. I know I always feel like I accomplish something if I make it to the double digits, but I think this was a long day, right? I mean, this is Christmas Day. They were up early, all the excitement of Christmas Day. They had to get the kids ready to go to this party. They went to the party. They dropped off the gifts. They got back home. They were ready to go to bed. John actually takes a melatonin, which, you know, just hearing that kind of takes you back because the 90s were the time of melatonin. Melatonin was the big thing in the 90s to help you sleep. And John takes one of those. He goes to bed. They're now asleep, at least according to the story that they are telling. And, you know, we're telling you sort of the timeline as it's generally understood. Obviously, if it turns out that JonBenét's parents are involved in her murder, a lot of this part may or may not be true. And so that's just something to keep in the back of your head. Obviously, as we continue through this timeline, we're going to see statements made by other people that help flesh things out a little bit. So it's now after 10:33. At around midnight, a neighbor sees lights at the Ramseys' house. This neighbor is named Scott Gibbons. He was in the kitchen. He looks out his kitchen window at the Ramsey residence, and he can see that the kitchen lights are on, though they are dimmed low. This stood out to him just because the lights weren't normally on, but of course, someone could have left them on by accident. It's not necessarily significant, though, given what's going to happen, every little thing attains a level of significance. My neighbor, this is definitely an aside.
This is a fantastic story, and it's absolutely appropriate.
Yeah, my next door neighbor, I don't know why, but when I moved into this house, it seemed like their television was always on, and I could see into their living room. All I could see was the television. I couldn't see anything else. And the television was always on, but I didn't really notice it until I had a baby. And then I was getting up, in the middle of the night to make bottles or whatever, and I would wander into the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning and look across, and the TV would be on. And there were times where I wondered, do I need to go check on these people? Because it's like they've never turned their TV off. For the first 2 years that I was in this house, they never turned their TV off. And then one day it was off, and it was like a revelation. Anyways, that's an aside, but that's the kind of thing you notice when you have neighbors that you can see. It's late at night. You notice that their lights are on. So this doesn't strike me as strange that Scott's saying that he saw this. So that's at midnight. At 1 o'clock, another group of neighbors, Adam Vermeeri and Luke Vermeeri, they are going to bed after watching a movie on Christmas Day. And the interesting thing about them is they don't notice anything unusual. When the police talk to them, they say at 1 o'clock in the morning, didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. At 2 a.m., however, something happens. A neighbor named Melody Stanton heard a scream coming from the direction of the Ramsey household. We're going to talk more about this scream later on. Obviously, if it's true that she heard this scream at 2 o'clock in the morning, that is pretty significant, particularly since we don't have a firm grasp on when JonBenét Ramsey's time of death was. At around 5:30, John wakes up. They have plans to attend a family gathering at Charlevoix, Michigan, which is a beautiful place on the northern side of Michigan, right on Lake Michigan, the kind of place that if you have money, you can, this is a beautiful place to go. It's a vacation town. And that's where they're going to go to spend their Christmas. You might be wondering why they're going to go to Michigan. It's because John, he is actually from that area, and so that's where they go to celebrate Christmas with their family.
I'm just curious, Brett. Have you taken melatonin before?
I have not.
Have you? I have before, like when I've gone to Alaska in the summer and, there was daylight almost 23 and a half hours a day. And so I usually don't like taking anything for sleep because I always wake up incredibly groggy. And one thing that I notice, I do not take melatonin often, but when I do, it's usually when I anticipate jet lag or flying somewhere where it'd be difficult to sleep like Alaska. And it's difficult for me to wake up, 7 hours later? It's very difficult for me to wake up, period, and difficult for me to wake up like under 8 hours of sleep. I think my body's still in that rhythm because it's been, kind of induced into this false sleep cycle. And so I just know that a 5:30 wake up after taking melatonin at 10 would be difficult for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's often said that he took a sleeping pill, but he didn't really. I mean, melatonin is sort of a natural sleeping pill. And I know people who have had that experience with it, where they take it and it kind of knocks them out. I knew family members who took it in the 90s, because like I said, the 90s, melatonin was all the rage. It was what people were doing for a good sleep. And I knew people who had no effect on them whatsoever. So hard to say exactly what John's experience was. But it is something that he's pointed to as a reason that if anything happened in that house, he wouldn't have known about it because he was out. He had taken this pill, he'd gone to sleep, and it would not have been unusual for him not to notice anything. Obviously not necessarily true for the other.
But Patsy didn't take any melatonin, correct?
Correct. Patsy did not, so...
Nor did Burke.
So that kind of leaves that open. But it's certainly interesting. It's like everything else, right? What does this mean? Is he just telling the truth because that's what he did? Or is this convenient that he would be under the influence of this sleeping pill and thus not know anything that might have happened that night? Alice, before we continue, I want to let everyone know that The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. What's one thing you'd purchase with a little extra savings? A weighted blanket? Smart speaker? That new self-care trend you keep hearing about? Well, Progressive wants to make sure you're getting what you want by helping you save money on car insurance. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. Discounts like having multiple vehicles on your policy. Progressive offers outstanding coverage and award-winning claim service. Day or night, they have customer support 24/7, 365 days a year. When you need them most, they're at their best. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. In any event, he wakes up at 5:30. Interestingly, whereas he went to sleep about... The interesting thing about this timeline is Patsy and John going to sleep and waking up is 3 minutes apart. So it has him waking up at 5:30 and her waking up at 5:33. I guess the point of that is just to say he woke up first, then Patsy woke up. So she gets dressed, and in fact, as we will talk about more, she gets dressed in the same outfit that she wore to the Whites' party the night before. She puts on her makeup, and she goes to the second floor to rinse out JonBenét's jumpsuit. I guess that's what she's going to wear, so she's going to wash it off. And then she goes downstairs to the kitchen, and it is as she is going downstairs to the kitchen that she discovers the infamous Ransom Note in this case. She goes down the back stairs. So their house has 2 stairs, sort of a grand staircase in the front, and then in the back, a staircase that's more of a servant's staircase. But those of you who've ever lived in a house like this, everybody always uses the back staircase, right? Like nobody ever uses the grand entrance. I don't know why that is, but that's just the way it is. So
Because the back entrance or the back staircase typically leads to the heart of the home, right? The kitchen, the living room, where your family actually lives, not in the formal areas of the house.
And as Patsy is going down this staircase to the kitchen, which is exactly what Alice was describing, it's going to the main part of the house, there are some sheets of paper on a step near the bottom. In fact, 3 sheets of paper. Now, there are a couple of things that the Ramseys are adamant about that I don't understand. I don't understand, frankly, why they'd be adamant about them if they're not involved, and I don't know why they'd be adamant about them if they're not involved. So one of the things they're adamant about, in addition to JonBenét being asleep when they got home from the party, is Patsy says she doesn't pick up the note. She steps over the note and then sort of reads the note as it's laying there on the ground. She only gets through a couple sentences of this note before she realizes something is horribly wrong, that someone has kidnapped JonBenét. At this point, she screams. She runs up to the 3rd floor, or she runs up to the floor that the children's rooms are on, and as she's going up, John Ramsey is actually running downstairs, and he runs into her. So then they go together, first to JonBenét's room, find the room is empty. She's not there. They then run down to Burke's room. He is in his bed. He appears to be asleep. He will later say that he was not asleep because he had heard all this commotion, but he kind of acted like he was asleep because he was scared of what was going on, and he wanted to stay in bed. He didn't want to get up and sort of confront it, which frankly to me sounds like a very natural reaction from a child in a situation like that.
Yeah, same here. Now, sometime before 5:52 a.m., John Ramsey reads the ransom note. He also says that he never picked up the note, but rather, like Patsy, kind of bent down and read it while it lay on the floor.
And is it just me that thinks this is weird? I mean, I get it's actually good practice when you got evidence of a kidnapping not to pick up the note because it might have somebody else's fingerprints on it. But I don't think I'd be thinking that in the moment.
Exactly. Have you ever seen those like hidden camera videos where someone puts like a dollar bill on a fish line on the floor, and then they drag it and to see how long people will chase it, and people chase it for like blocks, even though it's like completely implausible that this dollar bill would be flying in the wind for this many blocks, but they chase it to finally catch it. I feel like when you see something, especially if it contains important information like a ransom note, your gut reaction is to touch it. Right. And I say this because when we go into the evidence room or we show evidence to defense counsel, oftentimes everyone's initial reaction in defense counsel, and we know that you shouldn't just be touching different things. Right. And oftentimes I've had to reach out my hand and say, we can't touch that particular thing. And we're talking, this has already been fingerprinted. It's already been vacuum sealed and everything. But everyone's first reaction is to touch the gun, touch the money, touch the packet of cocaine, whatever it is. I think that's just human nature, especially if you're in a state of stress. You'll grab it. And this is interesting because we know even if they are thinking about preserving fingerprints, they do quite the opposite later when JonBenét is found. So we can talk about that then.
Yeah, and it's such a good point you make about evidence in trial. You might think that's not a big deal, but it actually does become a big deal because you have defense attorneys and prosecutors handling evidence, and then 10, 20 years later, somebody wants to do new DNA tests on that evidence, and everybody's like, well, there's a problem there. We kind of completely contaminated it, so we don't know whether or not we're going to be able to use it or not, whether or not that's going to be helpful or not. We may have completely messed that up. So it is something, sort of an ongoing problem. And, in Murder, She Wrote, those of you who've ever seen Murder, She Wrote, in every episode, the person who's innocent but is going to be charged, same thing always happened in Matlock too, finds the body and there's either a gun or a knife and they always pick it up. And you're like, why are you doing that? And of course, then the police walk in as they're handling the murder weapon, and now their fingerprints are all over it. That always seemed absurd. This seems weird to me that nobody would just pick up the note. So I don't know. It's one of those weird things. People have gone so far as to do tests about whether or not it is possible to walk down that staircase and step over the note because of the way it spirals. And there's people who say you can't do it, that you literally could not step over the note because of the spiral. You'd like fall down the stairs if you tried to do that. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not. Those are obviously not scientific tests that people are engaged in, but it is an interesting thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like this note has, murder or red rum scrawled in huge letters. It's actually a very detailed, extensive letter that contains very confusing verbiage, and the way the words are put together it's really not common vernacular. It's not how we speak. And so it's difficult to even understand what the note is saying. I can't imagine, and I think all of us have had that experience where I bring like a confusing document closer to my face because I'm like trying to make sense of it. I'm like, this is not English. This is not the English I know. I'm very confused by this. I put my finger on it. I kind of trace the words, So this is not like some very simple one word, kidnapped or, ransom, nothing like that. This is a very detailed handwritten note. The other thing is it's handwritten, meaning it's not typed out. I can imagine being able to read typed because everything's uniform, but no matter how good your handwriting is, it's slower for me to read any handwritten note than it is to read typewritten because it is not uniform when it's handwritten. And these are all things that would point me towards a natural reading of the note to include handling it.
Now, one thing that is definitely going to happen, at some point Patsy is picking up this note. It's unclear whether she ever acknowledges that, but the very next thing that happens is there's a 911 call. And when you listen to the 911 call, which we are going to do now, there's a point where it's pretty clear that she's reading the note. She is reading the note back to the operator, because the operator at some point asks her whether or not the note is signed or there's a name. And it's very clear that she is looking to the end of this note and reading the bottom of it as, the potential name. Now, the reason I say she had to have picked up the note, you may recall, is on the stairway or on the stairwell on one of the stairs. She is using a landline telephone in her kitchen. I don't know how far the kitchen was to the staircase, but it's pretty clear that she's got the note in her hand when she does this. They will later do fingerprint analysis on the note. They won't find anybody's fingerprints, which is not that unusual. As we've talked about before, fingerprints are not as common as you might think or as you've seen on various television shows, and paper in particular is not, unless you have some ink on your fingers or some like pencil shavings or something. It's just not that unusual that you would not leave a fingerprint on a note.
And Brett, one other thing I wanted to note about the note is because there's so many words on the page, I'm surprised they wouldn't have picked it up to look on the back to see if it was double-sided.
That's a good point, because there are a ton of words.
And we'll get into that later. Now, at 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey makes her 911 call. John told Patsy to call the police, and as you may know, whenever 911 receives a call, they log the time that they receive it. And 911 logs this call at 5:52 a.m. Okay, we're going to keep moving on to talk about the rest of the timeline, but we will talk more in detail about this 911 call later. And at that time, we'll play it for you so that you can analyze alongside us.
Alice, before we continue, I want to introduce the newest sponsor of this podcast, Sundance Now. After a long day, I just want to curl up on the couch and get lost in a gripping story with characters I can love and hate. Is that too much to ask? Nope. Thanks to Sundance Now, I always have something to watch that's binge-worthy and that I can be obsessed with. Sundance Now is an ad-free streaming service created by AMC Networks for people who obsess over riveting storytelling and fresh perspectives. Sundance Now has original prestige dramas, international thrillers, and my favorite, bone-chilling true crime shows. Every show is a sleek production with sexy lead characters. They've got shows like the hit British series, A Discovery of Witches. It's the perfect mix of period drama, romance, and edge-of-your-seat thriller. Seasons 1, 2, and the third and final season are now available for streaming. I'm a big fan of Discovery of Witches. You guys know I love horror, and I love everything spooky. And when you give me witches and vampires in a book that maybe can save the world or let somebody take it over that's been lost for generations, I am hooked. You can watch it too. You can stream Sundance Now on all your favorite devices for as low as $4.99 a month. Just download the app or watch online and discover exclusive shows from around the world instantly. I found my next TV obsession on Sundance Now, and you will too. Try Sundance Now free for 30 days by going to sundancenow.com and use promo code PROSECUTORS. That's sundancenow.com, code PROSECUTORS for 30 days of free streaming. Sundancenow.com, code PROSECUTORS.
Right after Patsy calls 911, after she hangs up with them, she then picks up the phone and calls two sets of family friends. So this is sometime after 5:52 a.m. First, she calls Fleet and Priscilla White. You may remember they went to Fleet and Priscilla's house the night before for a Christmas party. And she also calls John and Barbara Fernie, who are friends of the family.
This seems pretty normal to me. I mean, I don't know. I've never been in a situation like that, but I would think probably, I'd probably call you, frankly. Would be probably the first person I'd call. And, this doesn't strike me as strange that you would call your friends.
I think that's right because remember, especially with such a young child, the likelihood that they are somewhere familiar is high. I mean, this is just in part reaching out for emotional support and also just in hopes that somehow they saw something, know something, and you just need a support system around you. So I don't think this is that unusual.
And you want to do something with Burke, right? Like you want to get Burke away from the house. You want to send him somewhere with somebody you trust. Because whatever's going to happen the rest of this day, the last thing you want is your 9-year-old there while it's going on. I mean, that's my thing. I think I would want to to get him out of the house. So that's another reason to call the friends, because he's probably going to end up going with one of these friends.
Right. And now the police react quickly. Remember, the call is logged at 5:52 a.m. Just a few minutes later at 5:55 a.m., Officer French is directed to 755 15th Street, and all he knows is that there's a ransom demand and a kidnapping that he's to go investigate. Sometime after 5:59 a.m., Officer French arrives at the Ramsey home, and he is led to the Ransom Note. Now, in a story based on reading police reports, Newsweek reporters claim, quote, French read the ransom note and later conducted a quick search of the house. Although no time frame is given for this, French himself stated in a Vanity Fair interview that after being greeted by Patsy on arrival, quote, John Ramsey directed me through the house and pointed out a 3-page handwritten note which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area. This is very interesting to me because what Brett just said, about 8 minutes before this, when Patsy calls 911, the letter is not on the floor, but rather likely in her hands. So someone lays it back on the floor that it was, I guess, where it was supposed to be found.
Yeah, it's hard for me to believe, and maybe I'm making a lot out of nothing, that Patsy gets the phone. I don't know if it's a corded phone or a cordless phone, but she gets the phone, walks over, is talking to the lady on 911. You're going to hear this when we play the 911 call. She gets asked what the name is, and she wanders over to where this letter is, bends over to look at the bottom of it, and reads it. I just don't believe that. I don't believe that's what happened. The natural thing to do would be just to pick up the letter and read it. I don't know.
Especially because time is of the essence, right?
Right.
At this point, you think she's just kidnapped. You're trying to figure out the riddle as soon as possible. You're not thinking about who kidnapped my daughter. You just want your daughter back, right? I wouldn't be thinking about, well, I might contaminate the DNA because then we can't prove it. I couldn't care if you can prove it. I just want my daughter back. And that ransom note, as far as I know, is the ticket to me getting my daughter back. In
100%.
that mind, that would be my mindset.
100%. And you would want to have all that information at the tip of your fingers in case you do get asked about it, right? I mean, I'd be reading that letter over and over and over again. I mean, I would be touching it. I'd be smelling it. I'd be like, can I smell her on it? I'd be like flipping it over and stuff.
Yeah. Like what is there? Is there something written in invisible ink? Did she write, scrawl some secret note to me in the back when he wasn't looking, and, what have you? I would be just desperately looking at the one clue I have that I could use to get my daughter back.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. That's without question.
Yeah, well, there's still a lot to discuss there, but we'll keep moving with the timeline. Now, it's still early in the day. The next part is going to happen between 6 and 7 a.m. Sometime after 6 a.m., Officer French searched the basement. Now, Officer French fails to search the wine cellar room, which is located in the basement. So, in French's search of the basement, and we don't know the exact time of this, it's reported, quote, he came to a door secured with a wooden latch. According to police reports obtained by Newsweek, he paused for a moment in front of the door, but walked away. Now, behind that door is where JonBenét's body was later found. So, why didn't Officer French open the door when he comes up to a closed door? I mean, you're supposed to search everywhere, right? Now, this is also from the news report. Quote, in the police report French filed about the events that morning, he says he didn't open the door to the basement room because he was looking for exits the kidnapper might have used. He noticed the latch was on the wrong side for a door leading out of the house. So he kept moving.
And let me just say, this is the first moment in many, many moments of the police failing to do basic things for, understandable reasons, but failing to do basic things that could have solved this case, could have solved this crime already. Remember, it's December 26th. There's a lot of people on vacation. Not a high crime area Boulder. Nobody's expecting something like this to happen on the day after Christmas. So there's not a lot of people around. He is just a patrol officer. He's dispatched there. What you really want is to immediately seal that home, not let anybody else go in that home. Get John and Patsy in different rooms, get their stories, get Burke's story, and search that house from top to bottom with, police officers searching that house, every single room, to see if there's anything in there, if there's any evidence. The entire house is a crime scene. I mean, that's the way you would do it. That's the way any competent police department would do it. Now, on the one hand, they are short-staffed. I mean, he's the only one there. He's doing an initial search, and he's looking for sort of an entrance or an exit. He's looking for a way in or a way out. And that's why he doesn't go in there, because it's a big house. I mean, it's a big house they live in. So he doesn't have unlimited time. He doesn't have unlimited resources. So he doesn't look in this room. He will say he regrets this to this day, that he just didn't open that door, because if he had of, then so many of the things, the insane things that are going to happen here in just a few hours would not have happened, and we might have had the evidence we needed to solve this case. But this is the first huge mistake that the police make.
Absolutely. And now, soon after Officer French arrives, backup also arrives. At 6:02 a.m., Sergeant Paul Reichenbach arrives at the Ramsey home. And right behind Sergeant Reichenbach is Fleet and Priscilla White. They show up at the Ramsey house about 6:03 a.m.
And what Reichenbach should have done when they showed up is turn around and tell them, wait outside. Wait in your car. We will talk to you. It's great that you're here. We know you're here to support the family. Wait in your car. We'll be out in a bit, right?
And that's not weird of you to say, Brett, because think of every police crime, scene you've ever seen. Usually if there's been like a terrible crime or even a car accident and there's yellow police tape, you have like the protagonist in the story who's somehow related to the victim running up to the police line, and they're trying to duck under, and the police put out an arm and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, you can't cross this, it's a crime scene." That doesn't happen here, and we know a crime has been committed.
And it just gets worse, because it's not only does he not say wait in your car, but it just gets worse. Like, everything that happens gets worse.
It's true. Because, Fleet White, being a good friend, he's like, "You know what, police? I'm going to help you search." And the police don't stop him. They let him search. So soon after he arrives at 6:06 a.m., Fleet actually goes down and searches the basement. Not with an officer, by the way. He just goes by himself. We've already told you lots of times, we don't go interview witnesses as attorneys by ourselves, because we then become the witness, right? We can taint scenes. We don't go to crime scenes by ourselves. We are always there with investigators, with law enforcement. We are not the ones investigating, because we are lay people. But Fleet went downstairs to the basement to look for JonBenét. Now, Mr. White testified that when he began his search, the lights were already on in the basement, and the door in the hallway leading to the basement wine cellar room was opened. But the wine cellar isn't actually a wine cellar. It's a storage room that the Ramseys, who barely drank, jokingly called their wine cellar. Notice how this is in contradiction to what we heard from Officer French's report, which is that he walked up to the door and didn't go in because it was latched.
Yeah, and this testimony by Fleet White. Notice it's this testimony by Fleet White. Notice it's called testimony because he is going to testify in a deposition related to that case we talked about, the summary judgment case. There have been a lot of statements made in this case by a lot of different people. By the time Fleet White makes this statement, a lot of time has passed. This is another thing to remember. So much of this case is based on eyewitness accounts, what people saw, what people remembered, what people wrote in reports. So much of that, this story of what happened that day, is based on what people are telling you many years later. So Fleet's telling us, this door to the wine cellar room is opened. He's later going to kind of contradict that. It's unclear which door he's even talking about. Is he talking about the wine cellar door or a different door? But in any event, he's down in the basement wandering around. An interesting thing that we're going to come back to, this basement, people keep searching this basement. They search this basement over and over again. And I think it's one of those things. I think there was some weird psychological thing going on here where everybody who went in that house, for whatever reason, was drawn to the basement, thought that something was going on in the basement because they keep searching it. And it's like when you lose something and you've searched an area several times, but you keep going back to it and searching again because you just really think whatever you're missing is in that area. Even though you've searched it 3 or 4 times, you're just convinced if you search it again, you're going to find it. And I feel like that's what's going on here, because this is the first of many times that this basement is going to be searched before JonBenét's body is eventually found. Now, we're going to put a diagram of this basement up on the website so you can see it. It's often described as maze-like. It is to some extent. I think that's a little overstated. You'll see it when you actually look at the diagram. But it's a big basement because it's a big house. And close to where this quote-unquote wine cellar is something that the family called a train room. It's essentially a large room where a train set that Burke had was set up. Fleet goes into this train room, and he notices that there is a broken window, and he finds a suitcase underneath that window with a shard of glass on it. If you look at photographs of the crime scene, which once again, we're going to put on the website, you'll see this window is open. Now, Fleet did not recall when he first saw it whether the window was open or closed. He just knew that it was broken. The suitcase you'll see in those crime scene photos is near the wall. But once again, because no one thought to secure this scene, Fleet actually moves the suitcase. He doesn't know exactly where he moves it or how far he moved it or where it originally was, but wherever it ended up was not its initial position. So it's not entirely clear where the suitcase was when he saw it. John, when he saw the suitcase, that piqued his interest because he did not think that the suitcase was where they ordinarily stored it. It was instead over near this broken open window.
I don't know what to say there because there's so much there, but it's also so unknown.
Yeah, and this is the problem. Once again, you cannot... We deal with so many of these cases. I know we said this last time, but I'm just going to keep harping on this, where every case we ever talk about, there's always a claim that the police messed everything up. And the reason for that is because it's like out of the textbook. If you're going to claim somebody's innocent, you're always going to point to the police and the mistakes they made to try and get another opportunity for your client. It makes total sense. A lot of times it's completely overblown. It is not overblown in this case. In this case, the police just royally screwed this up, and they've got Fleet wandering around, and he's ruining stuff. You know, he's messing up evidence everywhere he goes. The entire house should have been a crime scene because it was a crime scene, and Fleet's now in this train room, possibly disturbing the scene of either the entry or the exit of whoever it was who did this. Hard to know. Or he's disturbing the scene of whoever staged this to make it look like a break-in. But either way, Fleet's messing it up. So you're left sort of unable to make any definitive statements about what we're seeing because of what Fleet is doing.
This is why we don't have lay people do the investigating, because the first thing, law enforcement is trained is to notice these sorts of things, right? To be able to record. They're constantly in their mind how they're going to write this report later.
And Alice is 100% right. Even, despite what Law and Order might show, the lawyers don't go along for the investigation. Like, we don't tramp around the crime scene. We rely on what the police are telling us about the scene and what they saw for this very reason. The law of transfer is basically ironclad. The more people who are in a scene and out of a scene, the more evidence will be transferred in and out of that scene. To a certain extent, that's inevitable. You gotta analyze the crime scene. You gotta process it somehow. People are going to go in and out. But what you want to do is keep a very detailed record of who is where, when they're there, and what kind of damage they might be doing to the scene, so that if somebody leaves a footprint behind, that's going to happen. That's difficult to avoid altogether. But as long as it's marked, you're fine.
Right. To give you an idea just how systematic and detailed the police have to be in this, in, say, a search warrant where you're searching a building with multiple rooms, oftentimes law enforcement will even put like numbers on the doors in the order that they're walking through them so that they can later remember number one, was the first one we went to. So someone has already walked through this, and there's like big doors and signs on the doors to indicate what has happened and what has been moved and what may have been disturbed. And oftentimes before they touch anything, they take lots of pictures before they even cross the threshold so they can say this is the natural state of everything, because it's obviously impossible to completely replace everything as you found it.
And Fleet's not done. He's not done with his helping out the police.
You may have forgotten at this point, Fleet is not law enforcement.
No. In case you forgot, Fleet is not law enforcement. So now he goes back over to the wine cellar room, which, as we said, he has said either the door was open or was unlatched or whatever. In any event, he opens it. He either unlatches it or it's already unlatched, and he opens the door. Now, he can't see anything in there because it's pitch black, and he can't find the light switch. We're going to learn later the light switch is kind of in a weird place. So he's fumbling around in there trying to find the light switch. He can't find it. He can't see anything. So he assumes must not be anything in here. He closes the door back behind him, relatches it, and goes back up to where the Ramseys are. At around 6:10, about 5 minutes after Fleet completes his search of the basement, Officer Carl Veach arrived. Now, as we've said, many times, despite what the protocol would be, the police are not sealing off the Ramseys' home. The only thing they've sealed off is the interior of JonBenét's bedroom. So in other words, any person in the Ramsey house could, and often did, move freely throughout the home. So Veach has shown up. He's now wandering around, which once again, just because you're a cop doesn't mean you should be wandering around the crime scene either. And to make matters worse, at about the time he shows up, it's like as the police are getting there, more friends are getting there. Now John and Barbara Fernie have arrived. So now we have at least 4 civilians in the home, leaving their DNA everywhere and their hair everywhere and stepping on things and moving things and searching and everything else. In addition to these police officers who don't seem to be doing anything because they're not searching and they're not sealing off the home and they're not keeping the family all in one place. They're just sort of there. At 6:40, Officer Barry Weiss arrives on the scene. Now, at some point, we're actually going to lose track of who's there, which cops are there, which cops aren't. There's supposed to be a log of that. Every cop who goes in is supposed to log in. When he leaves, he's supposed to log out. Of course, they didn't do that. So these are just the police officers we know about. Shortly after Barry Weiss arrives, John calls his pilot back. He leaves a message for his pilot to call him. His pilot's name is Michael Archuleta. He returns the call in a few minutes. Patsy answers the phone. Essentially, they let him know they are not going to be flying to Michigan that day. Around this time, you have another officer, Sue Barklow, who arrives. In addition to her, you have victims advocates who show up to comfort the family, and they helpfully bring bagels and coffee. And so they head off into the kitchen, the place that is right next to where the letter was found, where Patsy made this phone call. And not only do they set up their coffee and their bagels, they actually begin to clean up. One of the friends who's there, we don't know who, actually helped out with them, and they're wiping down the counters with the spray bottles and the Clorox and everything. And so if there was any evidence in that kitchen, they have just destroyed it.
You can't see me, but I'm shaking my head in such frustration.
It's just amazing. It's amazing.
Frankly, I can't believe the victim advocates didn't know not to do this. Well, you know why? Because your victim advocating usually is not at the crime scene. Usually it's at another location. It's down the street. It's in another office. It's in a church building. It's not in the crime scene. So I'm not going to blame the victim advocates here, because the police should have been like, hey, you have an important job, but you can't do it in the crime scene.
And I get it's a difficult situation because the kidnappers are supposed to call, so it's not like you can move everybody out of this house, but you can move most of them out of the house. I mean, the only person you need in the house is John. John has to answer the phone and talk to the kidnappers, with a police officer there. But does this this is insane. I mean, it's insane. I've lost count of how many people are now in this house, but it's a fairly large number.
And this is why this next part is a little bit interesting to me, because amidst all of this commotion, flashing lights, people opening the door, coming in, coming out, Burke is still in bed this whole time. So around 7 a.m., his parents go up and wake him, and that's when he gets dressed and comes down for the day. So remember, they checked on him, at about something like 5:45 a.m., and he said he was awake. If that is true, he laid awake for more than an hour before he was quote unquote awakened and got dressed. Now at 7:13 a.m., Reverend Hoverstock arrives at the house. Everyone's here to support them, so he's here to also support the Ramseys. Sometime after 7:13. Burke Ramsey is taken by Fleet White and John Fernie to pick up the Fernie children and then taken to the Whites' home. This, I think, is pretty normal, right? Like we've said, Burke is young. He's only 9, and there is a lot of chaos, anxiety, and fear in this home. And so the friends are taking him away to remove him from the crime scene and also the hub of all this police activity and layperson activity.
And this is one of those things that some people criticize or think is important or want to put a lot of, emphasis on, like, how could they let him leave? How could they let him out of his sight? Weren't they worried that he'd be kidnapped? The fact that they let him go means they knew she hadn't been kidnapped, and so they knew he wasn't in any danger. He's not in any danger. If they wanted to kidnap him, they would have kidnapped him the night before when they kidnapped JonBenét. Nope, they're not going to break into the White's house in broad daylight after kidnapping JonBenét to go get Burke. That's just not going to happen. So I get, sort of the thought behind that, but I don't find it to have really any power whatsoever. This, to me, is a very normal thing to try and get him away from the crime scene to somewhere where he's comfortable and won't be any more traumatized than he already is. Now, look, would it have been nice if the police had talked to him and gotten a statement from him if he had heard anything first? Yes, that would have been nice. They didn't do that.
Right. And remember, Fleet and John they must be the Ramseys' closest friends. They got the, second and third calls right after Patsy called 911. And so, I've trusted you with my kids before, Brett, and I would do that if we were in an emergency situation as well. I wouldn't be worried for their safety with someone I was so close to that I would call them immediately after calling 911. So I agree with you. If these are trusted friends, it's probably better, that they be taking care of my son, because I'm certainly not in the state to take care of him. Between 7 and 8 a.m., a third person, this time, at least a third person, John Ramsey, searches the basement. Like Brett mentioned earlier, everyone keeps getting drawn to the basement. The interesting thing about this is they never just put a pin in it, right? No one says like, oh, I already searched the basement. You don't have to waste your time. We often see this in investigations, right? You have limited resources, limited time. You don't need to do that XYZ again because we've already done that. No one actually tells anyone not to do that. First of all, because it's certainly not searched thoroughly. But if it's not searched thoroughly, you don't send lay people down there. First Fleet White, now John Ramsey down there. This is the following that I'm going to read you is from John Ramsey's 1998 testimony. And in this testimony, he provides several different times for when he searched the basement on his own. So that's why we have only a range of time and not a specific time. He first states, quote, "It would have been that time period, 7 to 9. And later reiterates, quote, "It was probably sometime between 7 and 9. When asked whether it was before or after the Whites and Fernies arrived, John stated, quote, "I think it was after because they came fairly early." He then reiterated, quote, "The best I can do is it was, I believe, after the police came because they had gone through the house before I figured out what I'm going to do. It was before 10 o'clock. They had already done some preparation before that. So it would have been before, probably before 9. So then somewhere between 7 and 9. But when reminded that the ransom note said a call would come between 8 and 10, not 10 and 12 a.m., as John had supposed, John made clear that he had visited the basement prior to that time, since, quote, when we were ready for the phone call and I was prepped about what I was going to say, and I was getting the family ready. And so between that period of time, we were just waiting for the phone call, and I was near the phone. And I was either in the study or on the first floor. I was just waiting for it. So you can see how confused that timeline is. And by the way, this is what lawyers do. They try to give you pieces of information that help you narrow down a timeline. So that was an effective question.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is tell them. Because once you tell them, is it their testimony or is it yours? If you can jog their memory and sort of get them to a place where they remember, that's much better. And it's clear that that's what they did here. And so, yeah, you have John searching the basement between 7 and 8. Obviously not a very thorough search because, once again, they did not find JonBenét, but he did look in this train room, and he would later say, he noticed this window was open, and there's more he's going to say about that later on.
Now, at 7:55 a.m., Sergeant Reichenbach meets with Boulder police detectives Linda Arndt and Fred Patterson at the Base Mars Shopping Center to brief them on the case. So, because we know that means Sergeant Reichenbach at some point leaves the Ramsey home. Like we said, there's not a great log of when police come and go.
So around 8 o'clock, neighbor Scott Gibbons, you may remember him as the person who noticed that the light was on in the kitchen the night before. He gets up and he notices that a basement door leading into the kitchen area of the Ramseys was standing wide open. He thought this was a little unusual. It wasn't something he'd noticed before. Obviously, Scott is very observant about what's going on in the Ramsey household. So Fleet, you may recall, he has taken Burke over to his house to hang out with the Fernie children where he'll be away from all this craziness. At about 8 o'clock, he gets back to the Ramsey house. About 10 minutes later, Arndt and Patterson, who have now been briefed on the case, they arrive. They're going to take over. They're the police detectives. They're really the first people with any kind of experience in this complex kind of crime who are there. Because remember, up to this point, we got beat cops, we got guys who they deal with these emerging situations, but they don't handle them from beginning to end. And now you have somebody who you hope can take charge of this situation. So Linda sits down with John Ramsey, and she gives him some idea of what to say when these ransom people call. Remember, it's between 8 and 10 they're supposed to call. So it's a little late that they're meeting with him. There's a confusion about when this is going to happen because the note actually says tomorrow. And so depending on, what's in the guy's mind at midnight when he's writing that note, does he mean the next day or the next day? They assume he means in the morning. So they assume between 8 and 10 they can expect to get this call from the ransomer, the kidnapper, from the kidnapper. So what John is told to do is that he is to demand to talk to JonBenét, basically to assure that she is still safe and alive. John takes notes while he's hearing this. We have those notes, and he writes, "Must talk to JB" on his notepad. At around 9:30, you have John Fernie, who has returned to the Ramsey residence. He had gone off to meet with his banker and to make sure that they would have $118,000 in cash available. Recall, that is what the ransom note said. They want $118,000. We're going to read the ransom note at some later point, and you'll see that $118,000 is supposed to come in a specific way. So we're making sure we've got this $118,000 available and ready to go. And we do. This is 9:30 a.m. We're getting pretty close to 10, and we have not had a phone call yet.
Real quick, Brett, I just have to say, I'll be a good friend to you. I will take care of your children in a crisis, but I'm not sure I can get you $118,000 in cash.
It's good to have friends who can pull together $118,000 in cash.
It is good to have friends. On the day after Christmas, too.
Yeah. Of course, the Ramseys were good for it, so I don't think they had to worry about not getting their money back. But yeah, I mean, they're springing into action to make sure they're ready to respond to this whenever they get it. We haven't had this phone call come through. The other thing we haven't had is a comprehensive search of the house by the police, who are now there in a fairly large number. At around 9:30, Boulder Police Detective Sergeant Bob Whitson will arrive at the house. He enters through the rear exterior kitchen door, which may or may not have been the door that Scott Gibbons said was open. There's a lot of confusion about which doors were open and which weren't at the time, but he's coming in through the back door. So the arrival time, between 9 and 9:45, there's a later entry that actually says 10 a.m. It's not that important, but what does happen now is Officer French, who was the first person on the scene, he is now released. He can now leave. His time in this case has come to an end.
Now, remember, the note said that a call was to come between 8 and 10. 10 a.m. comes and no call. But honestly, no one seemed to notice, and no one mentioned to Detective Arndt that the suspected kidnappers had not called within the designated time period. You know, a helpful fact for the lead detective to know. Anywho, at 10:07 a.m., Detective Everett and Detective Byfield respond to the Ramsey residence. So more detectives are coming. Detectives are those who investigate these types of cases. At around 10:30 a.m., so let's see, 3.5 hours, more than 3.5 hours after the 911 call was made and people followed suit, people arrived at the residence soon after that, JonBenét's bedroom is finally sealed. And that's the only thing that's sealed, nothing else, as we mentioned previously. JonBenét's bedroom had been sealed off by Detective Arndt and Fred Patterson. Police reports also show that officers did little to protect the integrity of the crime scene, even though they did seal off the room. Believing the crime was a kidnapping, the cops cordoned off JonBenét's bedroom with yellow and black crime scene tape to preserve whatever evidence her abductor may have left behind. But strangely, like we said before, they didn't seal the rest of the house. Also potentially part of the crime scene, because there's no indication that JonBenét was somehow taken through the window. In fact, we know she wasn't. We know that the kidnapper was at least on the steps where the note was left. So
It's insane.
at least from the staircase to her bedroom, that is a crime scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. He could have been anywhere in that house. And like you said, he certainly, number one, he didn't just like apparate into her room and grab her and disapparate. He had to come in somehow. And even if he did come in through a bedroom window, he at least walked down to leave that note. So why they wouldn't seal off the whole house is, I don't know. It's just, I think the best you can say about it is just a testament to the inexperience of these officers. They just haven't dealt with anything like this before, and so this very basic thing you should be doing is completely missed.
Right. Something that's been completely lacking, a lot of things have been lacking in this investigation so far, is that, like you said, the kidnapper could not have apparated. This isn't Harry Potter. They didn't just show up inside JonBenét's bedroom. And so they should be looking for a point of ingress and egress. And there's none of that. In fact, someone's like, hey, guys, there's a broken window. They're like, oh, really? Oh, did you see that suitcase? Cool suitcase. I mean, it's phenomenal. Every single point of entry, every window, every door is a crime scene until proven otherwise. Now, at 10:30 a.m., all additional police officers and victim advocates other than Linda Arndt and family members and friends leave the Ramsey residence. There are now 9 civilians and only 1 officer. That's not a good ratio, because these 9 civilians don't know that they can't traipse through the entire house, which they continue to do.
Yeah, I don't know. This is another thing that is so insane. It is difficult to imagine it actually happened. You've got all these cops who've shown up at this scene, who've wandered around the scene, who haven't really done anything. They've allowed all these people to come into the house, and yet now they all just leave. And they leave poor Linda Arndt all alone to try and wrangle all these people. The friends and the priest and the Ramseys. It's insane. It's crazy that they're going to do this, but that's what they do. And she can't control everybody. She can't handle all these people. She certainly can't seal off the house by herself because this is a kidnapping and because the ransom note specifically said, do not call the police. She has been ordered not to use police radios to even communicate with her officers. So she's completely cut off. The only way she can talk to other officers is to pick up the phone, the landline, and call in to the police department and get looped in with somebody. So she's just there by herself. And I don't know. It's crazy that this happened, and it is going to lead inexorably to the ultimate problem in this case, the finding of JonBenét's body, how it was found, and what happened when it was found that probably destroyed any potential for solving this case. And it's all because Linda Arndt is all by herself with all these people in a complex crime scene that has not been protected. We're going to get to that next week. We're going to talk about the finding of JonBenét's body, what all went wrong, and how things spiraled out of control from that point forward. Eventually, hopefully next week. I mean, who knows? Like I said, this is a long case, and we're giving it all we got. So, just appreciate the fact that we're trying to be as thorough as possible. We will start to get into the strange things about this case. Some of the things we've already talked about, the state of the basement, whether or not someone came in through that basement window, the 911 call, the physical evidence in this case and what it tells us, and the ransom note, the one piece of evidence that we know definitively came from the person who murdered JonBenét Ramsey and is probably the key to solving this case. We know you guys probably already have thoughts, questions, comments, corrections, I am sure. Shoot us an email at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Tweet at us at prosecutorspod, or hit us up on Facebook in the gallery, or check us out on Instagram. Join Patreon if you're sick of the ads, or support our wonderful sponsors who support this podcast and keep us going. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to say before we sign off for this week?
So much to say, but we'll save it for next time.
So much to say. We really appreciate you guys going through this incredible case with us. Hopefully, by the time it's all over, the time that you have dedicated to it will be worth it. Well, we will be back next week with more information in this insane case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Okay.
Let's see if we get to some substance today.
No, I think we will.
It's hard. It's hard.
It's hard. There's so much. Okay. The other problem is, it's like I don't want to say what I'm gonna say later. Too.
I know, because it's like I don't want to tip my hand too much, but it's also like, guys, this is weird.
Yeah. Let's just not worry about it. Let's just go with it. Wherever it takes us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now to Christmas, right?
We are.
December
Christmas Day, yes.
Okay. Here we go. Plan to go to a family vacation in Charlevoix, Charlevoix.
Charlevoix?
Charlevoix.
I don't know.
Charlet.
It's not Charlevoix, so.
It's not Charlevoix. That's true. Let's see if I can something to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced before.
I know, but I've never seen it.